You got the screen?
Yep.
All right, cool. All right, so today we are going through the second part of the mammals. And so in terms of like big scale biodiversity, we definitely like kind of crushed Tuesday. We talked about what an amniote is. So that includes reptiles and mammals, birds too. So that amniotic egg and the skull fenestration. And then we went up into mammals proper and did a lot of like the deeper splits within mammalia. So the mammalian group is defined the common ancestor of things like platypus and echidnas and you. And so there's a whole bunch of features for mammals we talked about. So the lower jaw, the inner ear, the hair, the sweat glands, heterodonty. Those are all mammal features. Then we talked about theria, which is a subset of mammalia. It's all the placental mammals and all the marsupials. Therians have a placenta for the development of the baby. That is something unique to them. And then one half of theria is marsupials. We kind of talked about marsupial biodiversity. The other half is placentals, and it's not the other half in terms of species diversity. There's way more placental mammals than there are marsupial mammals. Marsupials are almost all in Australia and South America, whereas placentals are pretty much everywhere now, mostly because we've taken them places they weren't before. We humans have. And so now we're up here in the middle of placentals. And so the one feature I gave you guys for placentalia, so all the placental mammals, so monophyletic clade of therian mammals, was the prolonged gestation. So the placenta isn't what's unique to placental mammals, because marsupials have it too. It's the fact that the embryo, the fetus, is retained inside the mother's body for a much longer time and comes out in a more developed way. It doesn't go into a pouch like it does in a marsupial. What's really interesting, I didn't really think we had enough time to talk about it on Tuesday, is that a lot of work on mammal evolution going back into like kind of that last part of dinosaur time, which is when these splits would have happened. So in the Cretaceous period, the marsupial condition, so having a baby that comes out kind of like what we might think of as early and then goes into a pouch and attaches to a nipple to develop kind of outside the mother, that definitely seems to be like the derived condition, the like more evolved condition. So a lot of the mammals that we know about from the dinosaur time, what we can infer about their life histories is that they would have been a lot like us, modern placental mammals. And so it's not like marsupials have a pouch, then we evolved more advanced baby birth situation. It's more likely that we have the condition that was more common, and the marsupials have this specialized situation with their pouch, which is really cool because that's something that we weren't 100% sure of. You can go back a couple decades and you'll hear people arguing back and forth. Okay, so when it comes to placentals, there's two giant clades. I'm not giving you the names of the giant clades, but I am giving you the name of like 4 subgroups of placental mammals that I want you to know. And so the first one we already met really briefly. So this is xenarthrans. These are South American mammals, armadillos in one group, and then anteaters and sloths in another. So those are xenarthrans. They are all in South America, except for a handful that have walked up into North America since those two continents connected a few million years ago. And then the other group on that side of placentalia is the Afrotheria. So Afrotheria means African beasts. And you guys met a few Afrotheres really briefly. The aardvark all by itself in its own order. You met that on Tuesday. And then we talked a little bit about elephant shrews, and then kind of like a minute on those Afrosauricids, that little spiky guy there on the left. And so those are animals called like tenrecs. There's also golden moles. A ton of convergent evolution, those African insectivorous little mammals evolving to look kind of like otters, kind of like hedgehogs, definitely like moles, but not related to like the moles and hedgehogs and otters that are also placental mammals in a different part of the tree. So that mammal body plan evolving really similar adaptations in a completely different group independently. That's really something that I hope you guys see we'll pick up on a lot. Okay, and then we didn't finish Afrotheres. We only talked about half the Afrotheres, and then we kind of ran out of time on Tuesday. And so today I want to finish up those 3 Afrothere groups that are remaining before we get to the rest of the placental mammals. All right, so that first little right there above the tenrec on the left, I bet you guys can see the manatee and you can see the elephant. Then there's one other group, and that's these guys. These are the hyraxes. Hyraxes are super fun. They are in Africa and the Middle East. These are little herbivorous dudes. They are pretty interesting in their ecology. Some of them are like rock specialists, like they live on like cliff faces and like rock piles and they hide in them. If you guys ever hike around in Idaho, you might see like a pika. These are bigger than pika by quite a bit, but they're kind of that same lifestyle. They're almost kind of like wallabies. Wallabies in Australia hop around on rocks and hide in rocks. And so these are like the African version of those kinds of animals. And so what I think is really fun is that there's a couple species that can climb really well. So you can see there's one in a tree. These are a group of animals that I usually find students being like, what? Like, I've never heard of these before. What I like about hyraxes is they, even in like the early 1800s, people studying anatomy put hyraxes with elephants and manatees, like as like, oh, these are all related to each other. And it has to do with their teeth, the way their molar teeth kind of are shaped and the way they come in, although it's more extreme how manatees and elephants do it. But also they have these long incisors. And so you can see that one with its tongue out there has these long incisors, these front teeth kind of sticking down on the mouth. And so those are homologous with like the tusks an elephant has. And also some of the manatees that you guys might know about have kind of longer teeth under those big lips. And so it's just really fun to me that these like little fur balls, even 100 and some years ago, people thought these might be related to elephants and things like that. And we now know they definitely really are. So here's hyraxes. They got little hoof toes. If you can see their little toes, they've got little like hoofs on their feet, which are really fun for like running around on rocks. All right, I won't spend too much time on hyraxes, but I hope you like them. Next group of Afrotheres I wanted you guys to see are the Sirenians. These are named the Sirenians because they're supposed to be like the sirens from ancient Greece, the mermaids that will tempt you to your death. There's lots of fun stories, especially from like Indonesia and East Africa, of European sailors like seeing the dugong, which is the one there that has the more mermaid tail on the left, and like thinking, oh, is that a mermaid, when it's really this thing, these big herbivores. And so these are, of course, placental mammals that are adapted to a marine lifestyle. They never leave the water. They do not come out on the beaches. They've completely lost their back legs. Their locomotion is driven by their tails, so they like pulse their bodies up and down like a whale does. But again, that's completely convergent. They got really big, sensitive noses, and they eat plants underwater. Most of them, especially dugongs, are like associated with seagrass meadows. So seagrass are some of the only flowering plants in the oceans of the world. So like growing in well-lit sandy bottoms and shallow oceans. And these guys move around kind of like their cows, out on the grasslands, but instead they are in the oceans, which I think is really fun. So there's three kinds of manatees, those colors on the map. There's the one you guys might see when you go to Florida. And then there's like an Amazon manatee and a West African manatee. And then the dugong has a nice oceanic distribution across like Africa and Asia and into Australia. I really like you guys to see too, those flippers there on the bottom right are of a manatee hand. And so you can see that like there's digits inside that flipper, and those little hooves are like still present on manatees' front legs. So their arms, their front fins, flippers, have hooves on the end of them. These are really specialized animals. They have really cool ecologies. There's a lot of interesting stuff about them. But I think it's cool for you guys to take in the like convergent evolution with other marine mammals, some we haven't talked about yet, like whales or even things like seals, that are mammals that have adapted to living like in the oceans. So there's some manatee stuff. The last group of Afrotheres is this one. There are only 3 species alive today of elephants, 2 in Africa. The African bush elephant is easily the most famous one. And then there is the forest elephant that lives in like the rainforest of the Congo. And then there's also elephants in Asia. And instead of me blabbing, I'm hoping you guys can either like use the chat or unmute. Elephants are one of those animals that humans have a very deep and long and complicated, many thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, millions really, a year history with. And so I want to know like some things you guys know about elephants or like think is interesting about elephants. And we can keep it about anatomy, but also I'm willing to listen to anything. I know I've been blabbing for a minute, so like let's hear about elephants.
Male elephants have musk glands on like their skin, and then the like hormones from the glands drip down into their mouth, and then they swallow it, which I think is really weird that they don't just put the hormones into their bloodstream like internally.
Yeah, and then they swallow it and they get really aggressive and really crazy, like musked up bull elephants, especially the African bush elephants are like very dangerous. Like they will just attack anything. Like that's like a problem I know in like some rhinoceros conservation areas where like when like elephants come into must, like you have to keep the elephants away from the rhinos because they might just like kill one in a rage for no reason and like hurts your conservation. Not great. What other things we got about elephants?
The teats on a female elephant are between the front legs rather than their hind legs, like most mammals we see typically.
Yeah. And there's two, and it's instead of like 4 or 6 or something like that. So it's sort of funny. Like they have there's video you can see of like elephants like finding a watering hole and they kind of jump in, and right, their teats are between their front legs, and so it's really sort of bizarre. They jump in the water and all of a sudden those kind of float a little bit, and you're like, oh, because they're like not so different than ones we might be more familiar with, and that's really kind of catches you off guard, I think. Somebody's got the chat. Their tusks do not have nerve and blood. So Andy's asking, do the tusks have nerve and blood in them like regular teeth? They do at the root. So the tusks are incisors. A lot of people think the elephant tusks are canines. Like you guys have these sharp canines here, and a lot of mammals have very long, sharp canines. The tusks of elephants are incisors. They're not in the very middle of your mouth, but the ones just outside there. The seconds on either side of your mouth are the elephant tusks. And so what they are is they're very specialized teeth that have like lost the enamel on the outside. And so they're completely made of dentin. So they're ever growing. And so deep inside the tusk root, there's live tissue, nerves, and blood supply that's like growing new tusks. And so you can like trace an elephant's whole life if you cut a tusk like at the very tip and go all the way down up into the base. Like baby elephants are born with tusks that they lose, like they have little like baby tusks, just like we have baby teeth. But then I think when they're like 2 or 3, they start, no, it's not 3, it's younger than that. They start to get their adult tusks. And so it's really cool because it means like we can, if we have a relatively complete elephant tusk, if you cut it long ways, like you can like learn everything almost about that individual's life, you know, good times, bad times, reproduction, all that kind of stuff. And so that tissue is mostly dead. It's not like tactile or anything like that, or sensitive. And so they use them for everything, right? They fight with them, they break trees with them, they flip stuff over, they fight. They're definitely signals and status displays. That big elephant who covered herself or himself, I think, in mud, the orange one down there, you know, that when that face with those ears and those tusks comes out of the woods, like all the other elephants like know who it is and know who's in charge, right? Those tusks are like doing a lot of signaling as well as just being anatomy. I think elephants are great, so I could just sit here all day and hear what you guys have to say about elephants.
Don't elephants have the longest gestation period?
It's really long. It's really long. It's like, I forget what it is. I don't want to make up a number. It's like, I think it is like almost 2 years.
Right, like
Big
20 months or something.
Really big baleen whales, I think, do have a shorter gestation period than elephants do, which is like, okay, great. But that, you know, you can imagine the sort of like ecological implications of that. And, you know, if you want to think about really applied stuff like conservation implications, like if it takes years to have one baby and then that baby's still just like a little baby that has to like grow up safely, you know, elephant populations are really important to monitor, like with a lot of forward thinking, because yeah, they take a long time to replace themselves. Yeah, so to Savannah's boyfriend who's watching, yes, definitely. Humans have selected for smaller tusk size. We see that everywhere. And so some of these big elephants called tuskers, that's what they call big elephants. Usually in the Asian elephants get that name, but African elephants have it too. Yeah, absolutely. Human selective pressure for smaller tusks has absolutely been documented. Another thing that's just sort of like a fun fact is that like in the African species, males and females have tusks, and males usually have bigger tusks. But in the Asian species, only the males have tusks. The females are tuskless. And that was true before hunting or anything like that, which is cool. The last thing I will say before we move on, because I can't just spend our whole time on elephants, is that a lot of people think about, when they think about elephants and humans, they think about today's conservation, but they also think about like mammoths, like woolly mammoths and the Columbian mammoths we had in Idaho that are extinct now. And something I just like to say, and feel like I have to say as a paleontologist, is that mammoths are like an Asian North American group of elephants. they are sister to, every single mammoth is sister to the Asian elephant. And then African elephants are the sister to that whole group. So mammoths aren't like some ancient weird kind of elephant thing. They are elephants, and they are related to the Asian elephants, not the African elephants. And so the elephants that look like those two African elephants have been in Africa for many millions of years. And so mammoths evolved in Asia, spread around North America, got driven to extinction. And the whole time mammoths like came and went, there's always been like African elephants in Africa. I just think that's a cool thing. They're not, African elephants are older than mammoths, even though mammoths are already gone. I think that's interesting. Okay, we'll move on. So that was where our Afrotheres. So half of Placentalia was the Xenarthrans and the Afrotheres in terms of like the species splits. Definitely not as much species diversity on that side. Most of the species diversity is the other way. And so the next group I want you guys to learn, this is probably the worst, one of the worst names I'm going to give you for the entire class. So I'm not really worried about Chondrichthyes. I'm not really worried about Reptilia, but this one is a big one. You are Contoglires, and that's a pretty recently defined clade. It's mostly based on DNA. Glires are things like rabbits and rodents, and Euarchontans are things like us and those other weird things, primates, those other weird things you guys might not know about. So putting them together, somebody named the clade U, which means true. The true are Contoglires. It is the name. It is what it is. I'd like you to know it. And so Eukaryoglires is this group of 5 orders, so including some familiar faces and some faces you probably don't know that we'll talk about. Here they all are together. So you guys, we are the primates. And so there's a nice, I don't know if that's Homo habilis or who it's supposed to be, Homo species in Africa, like getting social. And then it's also these other 4 orders. So rodents and lagomorphs. Lagomorphs are things like bunnies and pikas. We'll talk about them. And then there's the other 2 sort of odd clades, not very diverse, from South and Southeast Asia. So it's the Scandentians, which are tree shrews, and the Dermopterans, which are sometimes called flying lemurs. They do not fly, and they are not lemurs. Or the Dermopterans. I'll probably use a different name for them once we get there. But so these are our closest relatives. So of all the primates, all of us, you and a lemur and a chimpanzee and a monkey, we're all primates. But then after that, these are our closest mammal relatives. And I only do this little, blow up picture thing for our big clade because it's interesting to me to have you guys like kind of take in that, like, as much as you might wish you were related to like a tiger more than anything else, it's like actually like, nope, rabbits, things like that. That's where primates go. But I think that's really interesting. And there's a lot about our ecology that actually those relationships help inform, especially the early evolution of primates. But anyway, we'll get into it. So this is where most, in terms of orders, rodents are like more than 40% of the species of all mammals. So rodents dominate in terms of species diversity. After that is bats. And with bats and rodents together, you have like more than 2/3 of all mammals. So we haven't talked about bats yet. So these are some rodents. They are very, very diverse, very, very impressive. If you're a biologist, if you're studying evolution and adaptation, things like that in mammals, like you have got to study rodents because they do everything. And so it's very interesting to use them as like an evolutionary system for your study. This is the first of 2 slides of rodents because there's like so many I want you guys to see. So go ahead and use the chat. You can unmute if you want. I just want you guys to talk for a second about these faces. Some of them I know you know, some of them I'm sure you don't. So please enjoy these rodents for a second and pretend I'm like taking a lap around the room.
They have very diverse fur.
I just never thought of porcupines as being rodents, but
So please enjoy these rodents for a second and pretend I'm like taking a lap around the room.
They have very diverse fur.
Hang on, you guys, something's happening. Okay.
I think beavers are probably one of the coolest animals, just because of their like life, like their lifestyle, like what they do, how they impact their environments. I think it's really interesting how much they're able to change their environment to suit their own needs?
Yeah. Sorry, I had a weird screen thing happening. You guys can still see everything and hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The beaver thing is really interesting. People talk about the evolvability of organisms, that like their genome and like the traits, the natural selective traits that like an individual would use to reproduce, the phenotype of an animal, like how heritable is it? And one of the examples that comes up all the time is beavers and beaver dams, because beavers build these dams based on instinct, and that is genetic, it's inherited. But then that dam like changes the, like you said, the entire habitat around them. It creates wetlands that, like, other animals live in. And so people wonder about, is a beaver dam part of the phenotype of the beaver genome? This gets philosophical, but it's like, I think they're a great example of like really interesting questions, because like you can have a mutation, you can have a beaver who like has a inability to make a dam or make a different kind of dam, and like it has real world consequences, and that's coming from like genetically programmed instinct. So that's pretty crazy. I see Andy's asking about Old World and New World porcupines. They are not related to each other. They have convergently evolved spiky quills, and we call them both porcupines, but they are their own things. Thank you guys for talking about rodents. Kangaroo rats, I see Calvin asked about kangaroo rats and water. They are very, 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 very able to tolerate low water conditions, but I don't know that they don't have to drink. Maybe that might be true, but I don't know that. Okay, so I hope you guys also saw the rodents at the bottom, the ones that have like the long legs. Very cool. A lot of South American interesting stuff. I want to show you, like, here's some more rodents. We can keep going.
My question about rodents is, are there any real, truly carnivorous rodents?
That's a great question. There are not any carnivorous rodents, like in terms of like meat eating, like in a sense that's like true. Plenty of them do eat meat. Even like a squirrel you might see in your yard, like sometimes they will go and catch like a little bird and like totally eat the bird or eat eggs. There's examples of like little mice that are, it's hard to say they're carnivorous, like they eat insects and
Yeah.
all stuff.
There's a species of ground squirrel that lives in the deserts around here. I think they're related to prairie dogs, kind of. But they live in groups. And if it's later in the summer where there's less water, because they get all of their water from the plants that they eat, if you shoot a couple of them, their friends will immediately start eating them, mostly for the water in their blood.
Yowzers. That's intense. That's different from carnivory, I would guess, because it's not a predator. It's just a dead friend. There's tons of diversity though in rodents.
It's interesting to me because like we looked at the marsupials and they kind of grew to fill the niches that other animals had, but it doesn't seem that rodents have really done that to the same degree in their ecosystems. They all kind of fill a similar low on the totem pole kind of niche, a prey niche.
Well, they certainly are. You have to think about like the things that go together, right? So like they're small bodied, they reproduce pretty quickly, they usually have pretty high litter sizes. So these are things that like make them prey animals. I think in terms of what they do, like their locomotion, their habitat structure, their diet, they pretty much have done almost everything. And the thing I'd encourage you to think about when it comes to like a comparison to marsupials is like the marsupials there, that was, in Australia, say, that's like 4 orders of mammal, and they have nobody else with them. These rodents have carnivorans and primates and hoofed animals like in their habitat with them all the time. There isn't like an open field in front of them with no other mammals in it.
I guess that's true.
What's up? What we got going on in the chat? Yeah, crested rat looks like a skunk. Absolutely. Absolutely. Kaylee said. There's a lot of signaling. There's all kinds of cool stuff. There's gliders. Yeah, rodents are pretty great. All right, thank you for indulging me, you guys, in talking about how many rodents there are. I think they're really fun. Those jerboas. So kangaroo rats were on the last slide. Kangaroo rats are like the one that's like on two legs. Jerboas are like an Asian group of rodents that are also completely on two legs, and they hop, hop, hop. And look at those tiny little hands and those great big ears on the jerboa. That's like a desert and like dry grassland animal in Asia. So super great, super fun. Anyway, lots of great rodents. The sister to rodents are the lagomorphs. Lagomorphs are much less diverse than rodents. They kind of fill this niche space of like small herbivores, like small hoofed animals almost, especially like the hares and the jackrabbits. They're out on open habitat. They're in the sagebrush. They're in grasslands and savannas all over the world. And they're kind of like, I always imagine them as like a continuum of like the smallest antelope up to like the biggest buffalo rhino thing. And hares are part of that spectrum. They're just like the one at the bottom size wise, but they're very abundant wherever they live. Rabbits, come on, humans have a long relationship with rabbits. And then pikas. If anybody's never seen a pika before, I hope everybody here kind of knows what a pika is or has seen it. If you're from Idaho or the surrounding areas here in the west of North America, we've got a pika in our mountains. Pikas are one of the greatest animals, I think. They collect flowers and plant material all spring, summer, make giant hay piles in like rock crevices where they like then sit on them all winter and like have a big food store, big food cache for the entire winter. They also like have like territories that they defend, and they're very vocal. They yell a lot. So if you guys ever go hiking and you hear pikas, I just think they're one of like the truly fun animals. Yeah, definitely around here we've got jackrabbits and rabbits and pikas. So lagomorphs are familiar faces. The ears, of course, are one of their big adaptations for like looking out for predators, because they are very edible rabbits. All right, we'll move on from lagomorphs. Here are the two clades that are closer to us primates. So a lot of you maybe haven't seen one of these before. There's two kinds of them. They're in this order called Dimoptera. Their common name over in like Southeast Asia where they're from is colugos often. So I'm going to say colugos. And so anybody have any observations they want to make about colugos?
Do their hands like wrap backwards in
I think they have a very it's called pronation when you can do this. I think they have a very, very high degree of flexibility there. I don't think they're like set backwards or anything. I think they're pretty normal, but they can do a lot of.
They almost seem bat-like.
Yeah, a lot of people compare them with bats. For a long time, before we had genetics, bats were often put kind of near primates and with colugos because they have kind of that same vibe, up in the trees, hanging, a lot of loose skin. They're nothing like bats in terms of how their anatomy is put together, really, but they kind of have that bat. I saw somebody wrote bat monkey in the chat. Yeah, they're nocturnal, enormous eyes, definitely nocturnal. This is how they get around. So this is a colugo with her baby hanging onto her tummy, jumping from tree to tree. And so you guys have already seen some gliding marsupials. So some of those diprotodontian marsupials, the sugar gliders and things like that, there are gliding marsupials. You did just see on the last slide, like flying squirrels. So a kind of squirrel is a kind of rodent. So a gliding amongst the squirrels. There's also another kind of rodent on the other slide called a scaly-tailed squirrel, also a gliding squirrel, independently evolved. Colugos are another completely independent evolution of like jumping and like stretching skin between parts of your body to make a surface to glide on. And so you can see her face, and then there's her wrist, her toes even. It's not even her ankles, like her toes, and then her tail. There are long, wide patches of skin connecting all those extremities. And so when she jumps, she can like extend them all out. She can control them. She can like pull up to get some lift. This is a gliding animal, nocturnal, lives in the forests of Southeast Asia. Super interesting ecology. And again, completely independent from things like sugar gliders or flying squirrels. Another kind of mammal, small, living in the trees, that has evolved a gliding locomotor style. Super fun. I think they're kind of sloth-like to me, because like they hang a lot and they like use their claws to grip kind of passively like a sloth does. But it's like if a sloth could, you know, do a Batman situation, which is very fun. So that's colugos. The other order that's close to us primates is this one. It's called Scandentia, or the tree shrews. And so tree shrews are our sister. This is the group of mammals that is sister to primates. So if you're not a primate, but you're as close as you can be to being a primate and you're alive today, you are a tree shrew. Tree shrews, as you might guess, like live in forests. They're pretty good at climbing, but they're often found on the forest floor. They are in Southeast Asia also. You can see there's like a little bit of diversity, like color-wise and all that, and like a couple differences in body size. But for the most part, these are pretty like conserved little running dudes. I wish you could see, you can kind of see their little hands. So the one that's over there on like the piece of metal, or the one that's here in the front, like holding onto that branch, I think it's really like apparent in the ears and in the hands that these things are like pretty close relatives of us primates. Most primates have, we're going to talk about them here in a minute, a lot of anatomical features in the hands and in the face that pretty clearly unite all of us primates. And so this is not a primate, it's just a really close relative of ours. But you know, you can use something like a lemur maybe and something like a tree shrew to get an idea of like, what would the common ancestor be of this animal and primates? And so I think there's a lot that is there, especially the one over there with standing on the metal with the eye stripe. If you look at its little hands, like you can see, they're not unfamiliar. Long digits and a little bit of a opposed thumb, or at least a thumb kind of out to the side, which is really interesting for them getting around. These guys are mostly insectivorous. They eat fruit and stuff and nuts and seeds, like whatever, but they're mostly insectivorous. And again, pretty nocturnal. There's one species in Thailand that if you ever go to Thailand, you would probably see one, because they kind of just run around like squirrels, but they're not. They're this totally cool other kind of organism. If somebody wants to do a project on these or a presentation on these, I would love it. They do a lot of really crazy stuff that I don't have time to tell you about, but they have a lot of like mutualistic relationships with other rainforest things in Asia that are pretty wild. All right. The next order of mammals is us primates. And so there's lots of different kinds of primates. Primates are one of the more diverse orders. And we are one species of primate. So here's a nice picture of a few different kinds. I'll let you look at it for a second. And then here in a second, I'm going to send you guys into breakout rooms. And I want you to talk to each other and kind of come up with a list. You've now seen not all, but a lot of the mammals. And so you know a lot about vertebrate evolution at this point, where, you know, bone or an amniotic egg or a skull, you know, that all can be inherited from ancestors that go very, very far back, and so is shared with other kinds of organisms. You've now seen all these other mammal features, you know, only a couple that I've given you as characters that mostly have to do with reproduction. But you are a primate, so you can like look at your own body relative to everything else. Anything that's not a primate. What are the features of primates? What are the synapomorphies? What are the shared derived features that are unique to primates? It doesn't mean another animal doesn't have it on its own, evolved independently, but what are the features that we have that unite primates? Yes, and I agree. Freddie Mercury's showing off a lot of good human anatomy here. That's why I chose him to be the Homo sapiens on this picture. All right, I'm gonna put you guys in breakout rooms. We're gonna spend like 5 minutes. What are some primate features? All right, so we got people coming back right now, but there's some people are still talking. So people who are in room one, what are some things you guys were talking about? That's like Ace, Alyssa, Jaden, Savannah, Miley, Will, Calvin, Deanna. What kind of things are you guys talking about?
We talked about like locomotion
Okay.
and like specified hands, allowing us to kind of like use all kinds of tools and do more specialized things. Like there's a lot of different kinds of primates that make kind of super primitive tools and use their hands for.
Okay. So we're talking about, like you said, locomotion. So something about maybe like getting around. Talk about the hands. So like the manus is what we call like this whole unit. If you put it all together, it's called the manus, the hand. And so it's very adapted, you said, for, or certainly used for a lot of different things. And then you're also talking about something behavioral. You're talking, and almost cognitive. You're talking about like tool use. So primates like using not only their actual bodies to like interact with the world. These are interesting ideas. People have anything they want to add to that or like comment on there?
I brought up fingernails as well because I can't think of any other species that have quite like there's hooves and structures like that, but not other primates all have like fingernail-like structures.
Okay, so like okay, we're staying with the hand here. So fingernails, yeah. So you can think of hooves, certainly claws. Oh my gosh, claws are everywhere. But you're saying things like a fingernail. Interesting. What about this group, or not group two, but the second room? What were you guys kind of talking about?
We brought
I
up
can't remember.
facial structure, like they
Oh,
all
so
have
tell me about facial
forward-facing
structure.
eyes,
Same.
and
Yeah.
they have forward-facing eyes,
Uh-huh.
and I'm not sure. I think it has to do with like the way the like nose and like nasal is structured, but you can tell just by looking at them that it's a primate, but I'm not sure exactly why.
I want to say, Addison, that's like a great, that is like one of the most fun things for me, I think, like teaching with like how we know what we know and like biodiversity. There's like a scientific paper that's being written right now that's about like students and comparative anatomy, but it's about entomology, it's about insects. And the title of the paper is, they're looking at stuff from all over the world. And the title of the paper is, I know it's a grasshopper, but I cannot tell you why I know it is. You know, like describe exactly, but I know exactly what you're talking about with like the face. That face is not a rodent. It's not a cat. That's a primate face. So what is that? You know, what are the details that make that? I totally agree. All right, so facial structure, hand stuff, what else?
It's the primate Gesichtsplan instead of Bauplan.
Oh, okay. Well, these are great. This is a strong start. Does anybody have anything else they would add?
Our group also talked a little bit about like feet. It seems like feet are very different than the hands, and they have kind of a elongated shape to them.
Primate feet are very interesting, and human feet are particularly ridiculous in a lot of ways, anatomically, which we'll talk about. All right, I'm gonna get started with what I want to give you guys. So here's the little primate tree. So I usually do like a pretty deep dive into primates, since like we are primates, but it's a little bit abbreviated. So here's our primate tree. You don't have to know what all those animals are, of course, but there's a person and some other things on there. You might recognize some of those animals. And so there are a whole lot of features we can use to identify primates. Well, first of all, you guys take in, there's the relationships. Look at that for a second. We're going to work our way through this primate tree here in the next few minutes. But there's a whole lot of traits, whole lot of snapemorphies I'd like you guys to know about that unite primates that I think are important. All right. Absolutely, positively correct, all of you, that we're talking about adaptations in the hands and feet. And so how I would like you guys to have those united in your mind is ancestrally, the original primates, the common ancestor of all primates is a tree-dwelling organism. So arboreal means living in trees. So we have arboreal adaptations. That lady has a mouse lemur on her finger And so a mouse lemur is one of the smallest primates. That is an adult mouse lemur. And so you can see a lot of the adaptations shared by all primates in both of their hands. And so what I mean by arboreal adaptations in the hands and feet are things like grasping. Each one of the phalanges or a phalanx, one of these bones in your finger, is relatively elongated. And so all together, you can do like this kind of thing, a gripping kind of thing. So grasping hands and feet, for all primates, it's both. An opposable first digit. So you guys remember digit 1 is always like this one, and then digit 5 is like your pinky. That's true for all tetrapods. And so an opposable digit 1 on the hand and on the foot. So the big toe of almost all primates, not you and me, but almost all primates also can do this, can oppose the other fingers into like a gripping kind of way. Absolutely positively fingernails. So not claws, but a bed with blood vessels, that a keratinous nail, so a nail made out of keratin, that is ever growing. So unlike some things like claws, your fingernails grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. You have ever growing nails only on the top part. I forget the word for it. It's not dorsal or anything like that, but like the top part of your finger. And then opposite your fingernail, which is tough and can get into things, you have very sensitive pads on the tips of your digits. And so those are very tactile. You are interacting with your world in a very intimate little way, and sensing a lot of information. So sensitive pads on the opposite side of ever-growing, relatively tough nails, grasping hands and feet with an opposable digit. So tons of details here about things like hands. So that little mouse lemur has a hand, that lady's got a hand. These are some of the features that unite those hands. And the same is true for feet for almost all primates, but not you and me.
Do you want us to know those as individual synapomorphies, or is it just arboreal adaptations?
Arboreal adaptations is like the red tick mark, but I mean, I hope you can know these.
Okay.
All right, so what about other things like that primate face? There are a few features that are definitely very, very clear. And so, of course, the forward-facing eyes, which gives you binocular vision. The fields of view from each eyeball overlap with each other and give you depth perception. So tons of animals, a lot of predatory animals of all different kinds, have forward-facing eyes or eyes that overlap because they have to gauge distance, because they're predatory. Now, some primates are predatory, but also you'll see forward-facing eyes in a lot of tree-dwelling arboreal taxa. And so you can imagine swinging around in the branches, jumping around on trees. You have to be able to gauge distance and, you have to have good depth perception. And so a forward-facing eye is absolutely a primate feature. And then the other thing that I think is really important that's related to something like that is that there's a post-orbital closure. We can also think of that as an eye socket. And so what I mean by that is your eyeball sits in your eye socket and there's bone all around the back, except for where the nerve to your brain comes out and the vasculature comes out. That's all in a bony case. It's insulated by a hard bone from your jaw muscles. So you guys remember that like all amniotes have a fenestrae for their jaw muscles to attach for when they chew. You've got your muscles from your jaw coming up through your fenestra right here, your zygomatic arch, attaching to the side of your head. And so when you chew, there's muscles flexing right here. And so in some animals, here is a rodent skull, there is no bony wall between those jaw muscles and the eyeball. So if a rat or any rodent really is really working on some food, the eyeball kind of like moves a little bit from all that jaw muscle work. And so if you are a primate and you're up in the trees, you can see there's all kinds of reasons why it would be adaptive to have your eyeballs like steady relative to what else is going on in your head. That's definitely a primate thing. Of course, the other one is that for their body size, almost all, not all, but almost all primates have pretty high brain size, definitely increased brain size relative to other animals, other mammals that are in their same body size class. So relatively big brains for primates, absolutely. This slide is about some other features that unite all primates that are more like social and behavioral rather than anatomical, but I think they're really interesting and important to like primate biology. So I always like to include them. So there's some bush babies there on the top left, some lemurs, some monkeys, they're macaques, and some humans. And so you guys can use the chat or you can unmute. Like there are some features here about primate biology that are shared by all of these primates that are definitely like adaptations of our order that seem to be deeply inherited for all of us. So what are the things here that you guys we might be talking about?
I would guess it has something to do with child rearing. It seems like a lot of primates do that as either a community or just very intensively.
Yeah, so a huge parental investment in offspring. Huge parental investment in offspring for like all primates. That's a deeply inherited trait. What other things?
We like having friends.
We like having friends, very social. Almost, not all, but almost all primates are very social and even have like very rigid like social structure that like informs their biology and their physiology. Like their emotional situation is informed by like the group dynamics. There are some species like orangutans that are like famously solitary and they are doing their own thing. But the ancestral condition for primates, social, a lot of investment in childcare. What other things? The one I like to bring up, so sociality absolutely is one of them. So go ahead, sociality for sure. Long time to maturity. So not only are you in your mother's womb for a long time and you come out pretty developed, but then you are cared for years and years for some primates. For some primates, for decades, like us, you care for single offspring. That's a humongous parental investment. And then the other one that I think is really interesting, it kind of goes with both of those, is increased longevity. So living in social groups, you'll have primates that pass through their own reproductive stages, but remain viable members of the group, contributing to the group's survivability, raising grandchildren. This is something that like is not very common. You see something kind of like this in dolphins, kind of like this in elephants. But so a sociality, a community, like kind of a social structure that like you die after you reproduce if you're a person, or a primate. Usually like these things go together. So relative to their body size, most primates have much longer lives than other animals. Like there's plenty of lemurs of the exact same body size as like a rabbit, and they live for 4 or 5 times as long as rabbits live. That's very different biologically. So these are the things I wanted to include here. They're not anatomical, but I think they're important and that you guys share them. So I think it's a cool thing. All right, so here's our primate phylogeny, and now I'll just do a little primate biodiversity here for you guys. So that first group, that first split off to the left, I'm not going to give you all the primate clade names. They all exist. Every single one of these nodes has a name. There's a million features. We know a lot about primate evolution. This is all a vertebrate class, so I will keep it pretty tight. So that first group over on the left are things like these guys, lorises, hutus, bush babies. These are animals that look kind of like this. Pretty fun primates. Mostly, they're all in Africa or South Asia. Somebody's got some like microphone stuff happening. Don't know who it is. Okay, anyway, most of these animals are in Africa or South Asia. And so you guys might know some of these animals. Lorises are famously really, really slow and kind of sloth-like. They eat like leaves and things like that, but also bugs. And you can see really crazy hands and feet. Bush babies are like little springs. They can jump really, really, really far. They're nocturnal. That bush baby on the left there is one called the Greater Galago, and it's one of my favorites. Like if you can see its hands, its thumbs, its fingernails, and all that. These are these bush babies that like they look like other. I think this clade includes lemurs too. Like you can see the relationships to like other mammals. They kind of have that wet nose, dog kind of nose, but on a lot of a primate body. So that's very interesting. Helps us maybe get an understanding of early primates. The other big group of primates in this side of the tree, so these lorises and putus and bush babies, are the lemurs. You guys probably know lemurs. Lemurs are a completely endemic, so they only live there, radiation in Madagascar. So some primates that got into Madagascar something like 35 million years ago and have completely filled a lot of niche space in Madagascar. So there's a huge diversity of lemurs. There's 100 species or more of lemurs in Madagascar. Some of them are adapted to very specific environments, deserts or wet forests or dry forests of Madagascar. A lot of cool stuff about lemurs. The picture on the title slide for this lecture is one of, I think, the greatest animals. It's an Indri lemur, so really loud calling lemur from the forests. The eye there in the middle is a really awesome lemur. It is nocturnal, as you can probably guess from its creepy face. And it like hunts for larvae of beetles, like just like a woodpecker does, but underneath the bark of trees. It uses a really long ring finger. You can see its long ring finger to like probe into a tree, just like a woodpecker does with its tongue. But it's a primate doing it with its finger. So plenty of cool lemurs. Feel free to get in there. Tons of adaptations to their crazy habitats. And of course, by the way, you guys, you can always unmute yourself and be like, I have a question, or like, I want to say something about any of these animals. All right, so that was that first branch off to the left, lemurs and lorises and bush babies. And so now we're going towards like the rest of the primates. And so the next like tick up, so it shares the common ancestor with everything we haven't talked about yet, but the next tick up are these little dudes, guys and gals, we can say, called tarsiers. Tarsiers are very small. You can see they kind of look like bush babies. They are their own thing. They live in Southeast Asia. They are nocturnal. They eat bugs. They are very fast and very hoppy. They move around through the trees like kind of really quickly. Great adaptations for their habitats. Very, very fun. Definitely very gremlin-y in terms of like how they look. I don't think I'll say too much more about tarsiers, other than like, I hope like, especially the ones that are all like, I guess that one on the left, you can really see like the leg, how curled up the leg is there. Like they are just also kind of like bush babies in that they're like springs basically, but they share a more recent common ancestor with like monkeys and us than they do with the bush babies and lemurs. So again, giving us a little more of insight to like possibly these early primate common ancestors that are shared by all of us. So the next tick up the tree, I am going to give you the name for. So this is Simiiformes. Simiiforms, you basically can think of as like monkeys. If you wanted to call a node on the tree of life monkeys, where it's monophyletic and everything in that clade is a monkey, this is definitely what you would call it. I think you can see there, those 4 animals at the top are all animals that I think anybody would be comfortable calling monkeys. And Simiiformes includes those, but also includes us apes. So things like the gibbon and the orangutan and the human on the right. And so you can see some monkeys are more closely related to us than they are to the other monkeys. And so we can just say Simiiformes if we want to. I like saying monkeys. When I say monkeys, I'm usually meaning this big group of monophyletic organisms that includes us as derived versions of this clade. All right, so that first node on the tree goes up to the left to the New World monkeys. So these are the monkeys that live in the Americas. So South America, Central America, into Mexico a little bit, but usually not much farther than that. So the New World monkeys, there's about 140 kinds of New World monkeys. You guys definitely know something about these monkeys. You've heard of some of them before. Howler monkeys and spider monkeys. Marmosets are very cute, tiny little ones. Squirrel monkeys and capuchins. I think what I would say about these is, again, they're their own radiation in South America. They are very adapted to lots of different diets. There's a lot of fruit eaters here. Howler monkeys are particularly cool for their voice boxes. They make noises that like go all throughout the jungle. There's tons of primates that have these like crazy vocalization abilities. So there's like the Indris in Madagascar, which I showed you in the lemurs. They're so loud and call throughout the deep, deep, dark forests. In South America, it's howler monkeys that do something like that. And then we're going to see in like other parts of Asia, it's like orangutans and gibbons. So it's just really cool to me that there's always like a group, a member of each of the big groups of primates that is like a deep forest dweller that's like very, very loud. A lot of people have done really amazing studies on like the faces of New World monkeys. You can see the faces are very colorful. Us primates, not just humans, us primates are extremely good at faces. You guys know thousands and thousands of people's faces in your head, but I bet you don't know thousands and thousands of different crows. They all look the same to you. your brain is adapted to pick up details of faces. You remember faces. And so you can see, these New World monkeys have crazy faces, facial hair, highlights, things like that. There's a lot of really cool behavioral and anatomical stuff about these animals that it's really, I don't know, almost like too exciting. So this is the New World monkeys. I'm going to skip this for now. The next tick up the tree is also a monophyletic clade of organisms we would like call monkeys, but these are the old world ones, the ones that live in Africa, Asia, and Southern Europe. So this is the old world monkeys. And so there's a bunch of them. Some of them you probably heard of before. They got things like langurs and all that, but there's also baboons. Baboons are in Africa and used to be up into Asia quite a bit. And so a lot of these are kind of similar radiation, and like you have like leaf specialists, fruit specialists, some that are kind of carnivorous. So baboons especially are kind of carnivorous. Grassland adapted species, forest adapted species, desert adapted species. There's all kinds of different ways that monkeys find their way into a habitat. And I've always thought it was like extremely interesting that there's almost the exact same number of species of old world monkeys, so Asia and Africa, as there are New World monkeys in South America and Central America. It's pretty cool. Again, color. Primates like these have color vision like you and I do. We're going to talk about color vision later in class. And some primates don't, like lemurs don't really have great color vision, and a lot of mammals don't have great color vision, but primates really do. And so I think you can see here where color vision is like coming in. There's lots of blues and oranges. That leaf monkey over on the right is one of my favorite examples where like the babies are bright orange. So you always know where they are. You know what I mean? You're not going to lose your bright orange baby. Whereas as they become adults, they kind of turn gray, which I think is just super interesting. There's tons of great stuff about baboons. That one in the bottom middle there is a gelada. That's a baboon that's in Ethiopia. It is adapted to like completely eating a grass diet, which is crazy for there to be a grass eating monkey. But if somebody thinks that looks cool, go ahead and look into geladas. Go ahead and look into baboons. So is the old world monkeys. And then you can see the clade that's left is also one I want you to know. And these are the hominoids. So you are a hominoid. You're also a simiiform, and you're also a primate, but you are a hominoid, and hominoid is the apes. So the lesser apes, sometimes called, are things like the gibbon, that one that's hanging there on the bottom right. And then the great apes, quote unquote, of course, that's a name we came up with. That includes us and things like gorillas and all that. So the great apes. There's one feature I want you guys to have that unites the hominoid primates. And that, of course, is the loss of the tail, or at least the external tail. It's really a reduction of the tail. So compared to a monkey, like a non-hominoid simiiform monkey, you have a reduced tail. So most of the vertebrae themselves have been lost, but then those like first four caudal tail vertebrae in the great apes is reduced and turned into this thing that fuses up. We call it the coccyx. It's your tailbone. You guys have it. It's inside your body. It does not stick out as its own process, but it's still there. So that coccyx as a reduction of the tail is absolutely a feature of hominoids. And then here's our apes. We'll let you guys go ahead and take a second to look at this. I think these animals are incredible. There's so much that has been written and said and studied about these organisms. These are, of course, the living animals that are our closest relatives that we share the most with genetically and behaviorally and anatomically, one way or another. So I'll just let you look at this. Feel free to use the chat or like unmute if you want to say something. I think the apes are very cool.
I have a more broad question about primates,
Yeah.
which is, do you know why we don't really find them in North America?
That is a great question. It is almost certainly mostly driven by climate. So most primates today are like tropical, and even then like wet tropical organisms. There's really only a handful of like temperate, dry area primates at all. Certainly in the fossil record, especially under different climates, like in Earth history, North America has, primates running around just fine. There's like really amazing fossils of primates from 45, 50 million years ago from Wyoming. I think it's like mostly a climate thing. So humans are grassland, dry habitat adapted primates. And so we are the primates that have spread everywhere else. But like most of Europe and most of, the bulk of Asia, like mid and northern Asia, also doesn't really have much going on in primates. There's no primates in Australia. It's mostly like they're a wet tropical group. You can think of it as. That's a great question.
I was going to ask, how far north do primates extend in like Africa, Eurasia?
There are monkeys that go up into like the top, like the mountains in Morocco, the Atlas Mountains, and then like they go up in history. They are up in like places like Turkey and even like Greece in human history. They've been extirpated from a lot of that range. And then like India, they're like all up along the Himalayas, but then they don't go up into like Tibet or anything like that. So it's like, it's climatic. It is like habitat preference. A lot of these animals are forest animals. Yeah, that's good. These are great questions, you guys. And they're not in Australia, even though there's habitat that would be perfect for them because of biogeography. Australia is its own place and monkeys can't get there. So that's why there's no monkeys there. Yeah. Yeah, great questions. I think I think we will do this. I think we're going to do what we can right now. So that was the features that identify all these primates. And we talked about primate biodiversity. I'm not going to send you guys into breakout rooms because I'm paying attention to what time it is, but can you all please use the chat or unmute yourself and just brainstorm here for a second? I'm not going to say anything. What are some features that identify humans? So yes, they have opposable thumbs and finger pads, just like all primates, but what are the features that set us humans apart from other vertebrates?
I think upright position is a pretty big one.
I agree. There's also a lot of behavioral things like written language.
Yeah.
Like,
Ace in the chat says two-legged, so bipedality, walking on two legs. Actually, wait a minute. You guys can still see this, right? I'm still screen sharing.
yeah, we can still see.
I like very much that we said written language because there's definitely languages out there that are unwritten that animals share. Things that linguists could identify pieces of that are like a language. But also that, upright posture. Jeez, okay. What other things? There's a whole bunch of anatomy there in the background too.
I think brain size is a pretty important one.
And what, we have smaller brains, bigger brains?
I think it's body to brain size ratio, like the cranium.
Yeah. Yeah. So the large brain. Yeah, like we are the ultimate, no offense to beavers. Definitely pretty extreme versions of this. I don't know if I'd say I guess it's true. It's not quite a synapomorphia, like an anatomic sense, but yeah, it's a behavioral thing we do. All right, these are great. These are great ideas. I like these. There's definitely many more we could talk about. Oftentimes when I ask this, people talk about like, oh, we have such interesting like relative hairlessness, like compared to the other primates. Humans that only have hair like in 4 places usually. Hair, our top of our heads, our eyebrows, pubic region, armpits. Everywhere else it's like pretty reduced relative to other primates. So like all of those hair structures are for signaling and display, which is very interesting to think about. Clothes are a pretty recent invention. A lot of adaptations like in our teeth and our arms, definitely group with the upright posture. Our feet are crazy. That has to do with bipedality too. Anyway, there's some interesting stuff that we can get into if you guys want. I like just emphasizing, and I want you guys please to retain and remember that every single piece of human anatomy is deeply, deeply inherited in some way from the rest of the vertebrate tree. So we talked about the fact that, like, you know, when you swallow, you can have water go down the wrong pipe and you go and you choke, or you could die because food goes into your lungs, you know, and blocks your ability to breathe. That's because you have a foregut diverticulum. Your lungs come off of your trachea. Your lungs come off and go as their own passageway. And that is a feature that is shared by osteichthyans. All bony vertebrates have that same setup, or at least inherited that same setup and then adapted it. So like your choking moment is an osteichthyan thing. Your hands and fingers, that's a primate thing. So the idea that your anatomy is like piecemeal inherited and is just such an important part of this class to me, that you guys are part of this tree. And so there's things that are of course special to humans, but there's so much of our anatomy that like is so much easier to understand and work with. And I especially think of any of you that are going to like health sciences. If you have this deeper understanding and appreciation for like the context of all this anatomy and like where it's all coming from. And so this is a great figure that's every single one of those colored bars is an individual. So green is gorillas, blue is orangutans, an individual whose complete DNA is sequenced. And then this is the phylogeny of how they're related to each other. And so I will let you guys look at this for a second, and I'm hoping somebody can like unmute and kind of like, or use the chat, like say in a few words, like what the relationships are of the great apes. And I just think this is so cool because it's such an overwhelming amount of data. This is tons and tons of genomes all together to show us the interrelationships of the great apes. So part of that hominoid clade. So what are those relationships? Take a minute to make sure you feel like you understand it. And then I'd love to have somebody either in the chat or you know, unmute and volunteer to like walk us through what this phylogeny is saying about the relationships of us great apes.
I think it's interesting that we often think of ourselves as very close to the chimpanzees, but if we look at this, we see that chimpanzees and bonobos are sister to each other, and humans are sister to that whole clade.
Right.
We're not like right next to the chimpanzees.
Yeah. So there's two species of things that, or sometimes they're both called chimps. One's called the chimpanzee, one's called the bonobo. They're both in the same genus called Pan. So there's two species of Pan. They are sister to each other. They are their own thing. Chimps and bonobos are their own thing. And then, yeah, we are sister to them. And then
then gorillas are sister to all that, and then orangutans are the outgroup from that.
Yeah, so I just think, you know, people put chimps and gorillas, usually it's chimps and gorillas, sometimes orangutans, you know, you guys go watch Planet of the Apes, like, right? They all go together and we're our own thing. But in reality, humans and chimps have a lot more in common than humans and gorillas or chimps and gorillas. And that's true in a lot of ways. It's not just like, I mean, it's true that chimps and gorillas are both in Africa. They're both pretty dark colored and they're both like living in the forest. So there's a lot they do share, but that's like shared from a common ancestry that goes back really far, not because they evolved that together, right? If that makes sense. So humans are kind of the weirdos here. And so those divergences there, orangutans diverging on their own for the last 15 million years, gorillas diverging on their own for the last 10 million years, and then us diverging from the chimps about 7 million years ago. Chimps and bonobos have only been split, I think, for like 2 million years from each other. So I just think it's really cool that we can know that. And the other thing that's interesting to me about this is that the way the biogeography overlays on this, orangutans live in Southern and Southeast Asia, really just Southeast Asia now, into like Indonesia. They've been extirpated from a lot of their range. So they're the Asian lineage of apes. Every other ape is an African organism. Gorillas, chimps, bonobos, and humans, ancestrally, we are all completely in Africa. So just, you can kind of like, just from this genetic data, make an inference about biogeography. And of course, we can add things in about like fossils. I'm not going to spend too much time on this again because of time. I see it's 11:14, but chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas have a pretty crummy fossil record. We don't have a lot of good fossils of them. And the reason for that really is that those animals live in rainforests, in wet forests, and wet forests do not preserve fossils very well. When something dies in a rainforest, it gets consumed really fast. And so to be a fossil, you usually have to die and then have your bones get buried. And usually it's in a river or a lake and they're preserved. That almost never happens in wet forests. So we don't really have a good fossil record of chimps and gorillas after they split from us. We do have a really good record of human evolution. The human fossil record, so the last 7 million years of human evolution, is really well known. And that is a functional of the fact that we are open habitat species. Humans are an ape species that left the trees and went to live on the grasslands as they expanded across Africa. Tons of other animal lineages adapted to those grasslands, elephants and giraffes and rhinos and horses and antelope. There's tons of mammals that adapted to that grasslands at the same time we did, but we're the only ape lineage that went out onto those grasslands. So I'm going to stop here. This will be the slide I end on. I just want you guys to see this. So this is a map of Africa with its different climate zones identified. And then all those orange stars, that is where all of the human fossil record, those are all major human evolution fossil sites. And so you can see we don't live in those deep wet forests of like the Congo or Uganda. We are in the deserty, scrubby grasslands of Africa. That's where our evolution happened. And that's really cool because it helps us inform our anatomy, standing upright, being bipedal, all these other things. So we'll meet back on Monday for lab. I will stop here. We're actually gonna have to finish up mammals before we jump into reptiles, but that's okay. Thanks you guys for coming on Zoom. I know this was like pretty weird, but I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys on Monday.